It might have been the most abysmal performance by the Australian public broadcaster in its 82-year history.
Whoa, strong words. Welcome to Mediawatch, I'm Jonathan Holmes. When the earthquake struck northern Japan on Friday afternoon, the ABC's 24-hour digital news channel went to rolling coverage, most of it provided by sister public broadcasters, the BBC and NHK.
We're going to listen into some coverage of what's happening there right now. This is brought to us from NHK in Japan.
But by the next morning, ABC News 24 was back to normal programming, at least if you believed
Tim Blair, the columnist you can't ignore.
In the Sydney Daily Telegraph this morning.
At 7:30am, when early risers would have been hungering for tsunami updates, they copped Contact Sport, presented by Paul Kennedy.
Well, no, Tim, they didn't. That might have been in the schedule, but actually they got this.
The earthquake is the worst Japan has experienced since records ever began. But
from 6 to 10:30 on Saturday morning, ABC News 24 stayed with the news from Japan. But at 10:30 and right through until Saturday evening, it reverted to its normal schedule, which meant half an hour of news followed by half an hour of stuff like this at 10:30.
On this week's 1+1, why bringing down dictators doesn't always result in reform to Arab women.
And this at 1 o'clock.
Tourism is enjoying an upsurge in Central Australia, but the camel expeditions have always drawn a different set of travellers.
Let's remind ourselves of the kind of language Managing Director Mark Scott used to justify the new channel last year.
If there's going to be a free-to-air news channel providing coverage of major stories, breaking news, news updates, then the ABC is in the best position to deliver that.
And this was the way News 24 sold itself as it went to air.
When a big story breaks and you're on air, it's really exciting, actually.
It's exhilarating, but it's also enormously challenging.
Stay informed. Get the news mornings, afternoon and night.
But the fact is, ABC News 24 doesn't have the manpower or the money to live up to its own hype, especially when a huge story is running over the weekend. The boss of News 24 told Mediawatch,
using the resources available to it, ABC News 24 provided significant coverage of key developments in the story.
As long as the ABC tries to produce a 24-hour news channel on a shoestring, it'll have to put up with flack like this, especially from its commercial rivals.
ABC News 24, this was your moment to shine. And how did the station do? It failed, and spectacularly.
The truth is that half the time it was fine, and the other half it wasn't. How about calling it ABC News 12? Meanwhile, the commercial free-to-air channels seem to be finding it harder and harder to distinguish news from advertising. At least Nine's Davina Smith warned her viewers about this one.
Now, we should say from the outset this was a publicity stunt, an underwear brand grabbing attention.
But that didn't make a smidgen of difference. The phony little demo in Sydney's Pitt Street made the TV news on all three commercial networks all over the country.
Their body types have been renamed after famous artists.
Apple shapes would be known as Rubens, pear Botticelli, athletic Raphael.
And the story got huge spreads in News Limited papers too.
Forget apples and pears, are you a Botticelli?
No pears, please. We're classic beauties.
So who's done this renaming of body types? Well, most of the TV news reporters were shy of saying the name, but the posters did it for them. Triumph is a multinational underwear manufacturer. But according to this media release from Thrive PR, there was some serious research behind the new names.
Following an extensive international study on women's bodies titled The Triumph Shape Report, Triumph has unveiled 6 new artist shapes which illustrate the various body types of women.
An extensive international study. Well, we did a rather cursory internet study linking Triumph and body shape, and we found the same company using the same idea a year ago. Another half-dozen models parading through the streets in underwear. But the city was London, and the body types that time were named after animals.
I'd probably go for cheetah, I think.
Oh, and breast shapes were named after mountains.
Oh, Mount Everest.
So the artist body types are just another variant of a well-tried gimmick. And it's not as though the company had been shy about the reason for it.
Triumph's new Shape Sensation range will be in stores nationally from March.
As Jennifer Burns said on 10's 7pm project,
Look, it just seems to me that it's marketing. It's all marketing. The whole thing is marketing. And, I mean, what is wrong with being at 10, 12, 16?
Well, nothing, of course, but maybe there's something wrong with this figure. We asked a media analyst what he reckoned the exposure given to Triumph's little stunt would be worth.
$445,000 at rate card advertising dollars. But because this is pure editorial, we use a 2 to 3 times factor, so over $1.1 million worth of public impact.
Wonder what the extensive international study cost. Oh, and the fees for the models, of course. A lot less than $1 million, I'll be bound. Of course, there are plenty of other ways to get your brand into the editorial columns. One age-old method is the free trip for journos. Take Fairfax Digital's Drive section, for example. It now features sexy little videos online as well as text and still photos.
Welcome to Sweden in the middle of winter, one of the coldest places on Earth.
Toby Hagen is Drive's national editor, and he gets around. Racing open-topped sports cars on an ice lake in Sweden, courtesy of their makers, Mazda.
Now, most times, you're trying to stay away from the law.
Testing police cars in Arizona, courtesy of Holden, Australia. Trying out a new Merc in northern Italy, courtesy naturally of Mercedes-Benz.
So it's pretty important with this car that it looks the part. Here in Portugal, though.
And a new Volvo in Portugal, courtesy of Volvo. It's not only Toby Hagen venturing to foreign climes for drive.com.au. Just last month, for example,
BMW chose South Africa's Cape coastline to launch the new BMW 6 Series.
And late last year, Richard Blackburn also scored a trip to Japan to test drive a new Nissan hatchback. At the end of the video, he told us,
"The bad news is it's unlikely to ever make it to Australia. Nissan say they've done the sums, and unfortunately, they just don't add up."
So, not only a freebie, but an utterly pointless one too. Now, we're not saying that Fairfax's Drive is unique. On the contrary, accepting free flights to exotic locations, free accommodation, free tucker and free grog on offer seems to be par for the course amongst the car crowd. Here's James Stanford of News Limited's Cars Guide website.
Welcome to Georgia in America's deep south, where we're here to test the new BMW X3.
And the Australian's Philip King was on the jaunt to South Africa in February.
BMW chose Cape Town to launch its new 650i convertible earlier this month.
What's fascinated us is that none of them routinely tell their readers that these exotic trips have been paid for lock, stock and barrel by the manufacturers whose cars they're reviewing. We've had occasion before to point out that News Limited's company policy is odd. Journalists have to let the editor know if they're getting a freebie, but nobody has to tell the reader. Well, what about Fairfax? Its current CEO is Greg Highwood. 12 years ago, he was editor-in-chief of the Sydney Morning Herald and told ABC Radio National's media report,
"The procedure is that there should be full and frank disclosure of when there is travel."
And in most of the Herald, that still is the procedure.
Destination, India.
Tales from the border.
At the bottom of just about every article in the travel section, for example, you'll get this.
Anthony Dennis travelled courtesy of Jacques de Ladach, Taj Hotels and Singapore Airlines.
So why don't we hear that Toby Hagen travelled to Sweden or Richard Blackburn to South Africa, courtesy of Mazda or BMW? The Sydney Morning Herald's current editor-in-chief told us,
"Until recently, Fairfax was the only media organisation in Australia to have a disclosure policy on motoring stories."
You can read the policy online. It says that one of the principles it's based on is
transparency with our readers and advertisers.
But a newspaper with a transparent disclosure policy would tell its readers who has paid for its journalist trips, and Fairfax doesn't. Peter Fray also claims that
negative reviews and articles after subsidised trips are common.
He's included a list of them in his email. It's on our website. You can check them out for yourself. But if you do take free trips, surely the least you can do is to be upfront with your readers. We asked News Limited and Fairfax why they don't routinely disclose who's paid for the trips. We got no response from News, and Fairfax's simply didn't answer the question. Finally tonight, a much more blatant case of an undeclared interest. Here's a news story aired by regional broadcaster Win about an old pub in the village of Clifton, north of Wollongong, New South Wales.
For nearly 8 years, the Imperial has stood idle, biding its time for a grand reopening. But progress has been slow.
Not the story suggested because of any lack of public support for the hotel's redevelopment.
When I see a building sitting there not being used, I think, oh my God, that could be such a great place.
I'm in support of development of the area. I think it's going to happen and I think it'd be good.
Reporter Michaela Gray told us that a poll in the local paper supported the redevelopment. The Chamber of Commerce supported it. In fact, she said,
at Monday night's IHAP meeting, just 6 people turned out to voice their objections.
But the Illawarra Mercury has a rather different take on the story.
Residents won't have a bar of pub.
Clifton residents have emphatically rejected plans to revitalise the historic Imperial Hotel.
Goodness, how come none of those furious residents were in the Win News story? Well, perhaps because of another little detail the story left out. The Imperial Hotel is owned by, and the development application has been lodged by,
Win Corporation Proprietary Limited,
owner of Win Television. Now, isn't that something Win News should have told its viewers? Nah, why would they want to know that? That's it for this week. Keep those tips coming and post your comments on our website. We do like to hear from you. Until next week, good night.